the whole book takes you from my childhood and all the way to up to February 2020. And the reason, okay, I have to explain why it's called The Apple and the Tree. Everyone, of course, knows the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. Assalamu alaikum.
It is more than an honor and a pleasure to have Marina Mahathir to talk about her most recent book. See, make sure that that's all in the screen, The Apple and the Tree. Life as Dr. Mahathir's daughter. I'm going to read the bio and then let Marina talk to us a little bit or, read some selections as she likes for about 15, 20 minutes. Then I will ask some questions and also talk a little bit about the book from my experience and pleasure of reading it. And if folks join us in the gallery, then afterwards we will entertain questions from the gallery. Marina Mahathir is a newspaper columnist and activist. She led the Malaysian AIDS Council for 12 years, served on the board of Sisters in Islam for 6 years, and currently chairs the board of Musawa, the global movement for justice and equality in the Muslim family. Marina has also produced TV programs, feature films, and a documentary, and founded Zavigo.com, a website for women and travel. I should check that out a little bit more myself. In November 2021, Penguin Random House SEA published her memoir, The Apple and the Tree, her fifth book, after several compilations of her column in the Star newspaper. In 2022, delayed by the pandemic, Marina graduated with a Master's of Arts distinction in biography and creative nonfiction from the University of East Anglia. Her main interests are in human rights and education, and she is an avid journalist. Thank you so much, Marina. Please, can you just tell us a little bit about the book?
Thank you, Amina. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast again. This is the second time. And it's a real pleasure to be able to talk about my book. So I will just talk about how this book came about. I've always loved writing from young. From when I was little, I used to love writing stories. I loved English in school. My favorite class was always the essay writing class, and I'd write all sorts of funny stories. And I continued writing for a while as a young girl, and then I stopped. I actually stopped for a long while, writing for fun, writing for myself. But I always wanted to be in the writing profession, and I wanted to be a journalist, which is what I wound up doing. First writing for a women's magazine, and a little bit for the newspaper, News Straits Times here in Malaysia. And then I found that being a journalist was not all it's cracked up to be, at least not in what I was doing. It wasn't the most serious, more adventurous type of journalism. And I wound up in public relations, still writing a lot, but writing, corporate brochures or press releases, that sort of thing. So it went on, and I got married, left the country for Japan for a few years. And when I came back, my former colleagues at the newspaper remembered me and remembered I could write, and offered a column in the newspaper. This time it was The Star, which is now the largest English language daily. They offered me one that I could write every 2 weeks, and I could write about anything I wanted. They started off thinking that I would write about family and children, very domestic stuff. But since they did say I could have carte blanche, I started writing about things that interested me, in current affairs, in education, in women's rights, everything, whatever was going on, I used to write. And I've written that column for 30 years. Which is, when I say it that way, it's a bit alarming even to me. But I wrote it every 2 weeks. for most of that 30 years, but now it's just once a month on Sundays in the Sunday Star, which is less of a burden. Um, but writing that column, it was 800 words about current issues, which is nonfiction. Um, it taught me to be very concise, very precise. And I got 3 books out of it, 3 compilations of that column, which was very nice, but I still felt dissatisfied. I always wanted to write a book from start to finish. And I always, whenever I met a real writer, someone who had written a whole book, especially if it was fiction or something, I'd sit them down and ask them how did they do it? How did they get from start to finish? And the funny thing is, a lot of them didn't know how to tell me that. It just sort of like, I don't know. I think it had become so second nature that they didn't quite know how to tell someone else how they did it. So I always thought I would go and learn how to write. And I started off by doing some small online courses. I kept talking about this and talking about this. And my husband said, look, why don't you go and find a proper course and I'll pay you for it. And I'll pay for it. It's your 60th birthday present, which is very kind and generous of him. He was thinking of a course that was 1 month, 3 months, something like that. And I looked around and I really couldn't find anything that really was practical and suited me. I looked at the Iowa writing course, which is very famous, but it was very strangely structured that it wasn't very suitable. And finally, a friend of mine, Bernard Jolie, said, you should look at UEA, University of East Anglia. And I looked and I found the course that seemed to be exactly right, which was the MA in biography and creative nonfiction. Because I only thought I could write nonfiction, but I just wanted to write long form. So I saw that, I looked at it, and of course, an MA is 1 year, right? When my husband only expected me to go away for 3 months at most. So I had to sit and think about it. And as it happened at that time, things were happening in Malaysia. There was all this political movement. The elections came round, and we had a change in government, first time in 60 years. And my father became PM again. And it was very exciting. I was involved in the campaigning, and a lot of my friends got into parliament and even into government. So it was all time of change and all that. And meanwhile, there was still this course at the back of my mind. Funnily enough, while I was trying to decide and very, very unsure about going away for a year, I happened to be in Bangkok for a conference, not a conference, some sort of festival. And I met someone who had done the course at UEA. And I went to talk to him about it. He had actually done a PhD. And I said, what do you think about this course? He said, forget the MA, do the PhD. And I thought, no, that's too scary. No, no, no. I haven't been in a university classroom for 40 years. How can I just go straight to PhD? So I thought, no, no, no. And then I was in Singapore for something else. And there was a reception. And I was standing next to this woman, and just out of courtesy, politeness, just trying to make conversation, I said to her, what do you do? And she said, I've just finished my MA in biography and creative nonfiction at the University of East Anglia. I like, what? And so I thought, someone's trying to tell me something, that this is where I should go. And so I finally applied. Funnily enough, Amina, you probably didn't realize this, but you might remember in June 2018, you were in Malaysia, weren't you? Were you there for the I Engage course? Right, which I attended. And it was during that course that the University of East Anglia asked me for an interview for, before admission. So they wanted to interview me. And so I had to take my laptop out into the garden to do the interview. And they couldn't see me. For some reason, the video didn't work, but they could hear me. And they kept hearing all these birds going on in the garden and everything. I don't know whether that helped, but a week later, they told me that I got a place, which was great. So that was 2018 September that I went in, and I was so scared, I must say. because I hadn't been at university for 40 years. I was terrified I'd be among, 22-year-olds. But as it happened, I had a lovely class, 15 people, all age ranges and from everywhere. And I learned how to write long form. It was very interesting. I struggled a bit, especially with the reading, having to read so much and keep up with everyone. But I did learn something, and I started writing a few things um, based on my memory of my life, my childhood, and everything. I just started writing bits and pieces. My dissertation, however, was entirely different. It came from an idea that my supervisor gave me, which was, and I remember again talking to you a bit about it, Amina. Um, I wrote a dissertation on the stories of Malaysian transgender people, which meant that I could interview so many people and all the trans women and trans men that I met and I knew, and it was great. And it worked out very well, actually. So, and that's how I got a distinction. I just managed to slip in and get a distinction. So I came home 2018, tried to keep my hand in. My classmates, we kept in touch. And during the COVID pandemic, we actually organized an online sort of virtual class, virtual workshop on our own and kept writing. And it so happened that in October 2020, Penguin Random House Singapore, the Southeast Asia office, contacted me and said they'd like me to write a book about being my father's daughter. And that was like, oh, I was so thrilled because I was wondering what to do with my course. And to have a publisher like Penguin approach me on a subject which I already had bits and pieces of. And after some negotiations, we agreed that I had to submit a manuscript by April 2021. So I had about 5 months. But it was okay. Yeah, I know. It's very short. But I did have the seeds of the book already, both from essays that I had written in class, plus I had done an online course and I had started writing every morning, uh, about my childhood and various things I remembered. So I did have the starters for a lot of the chapters. And so it wasn't so difficult to write the full book. And they wanted to publish it by November last year. And so that's why I had to get it to them by April or so. I now wish that I had longer time because I've been rereading it and I see the mistakes and there are a few things there that you sort of wish you could have written better, but on the whole I think it's been fairly well received. It's in Malaysia, Singapore, a little bit in Indonesia. I know people have seen it in Thailand, and it's supposed to also be distributed worldwide. There's also supposed to be a translation in Malay and an audiobook, but I don't know when any of this is happening. But so far it's been great. I did a lot of book signings, a lot of book readings, interviews online and in person. So yeah, it's been a very exciting journey. So I thought I might read some bits of it. Um, the whole book takes you from my childhood and all the way to up to February 2020. And the reason, okay, I have to explain why it's called The Apple and the Tree. Everyone, of course, knows the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I did put the story in the book that my youngest daughter, Shasha, who's 23 now, every time I scold her for something naughty that she's done or said, and which is rare, I have to say, every time I do that, she just looks at me and goes, apple tree, which is code for yeah, it's everything is my fault. I can't blame her for anything because it's only, a reflection of her DNA, which came from me. So that's why the book title is that. But it's not to say that I'm an exact copy of the tree, which is my dad, but say that there are, things that happen in my lifetime, including education and everything that makes me quite different. But yet at the same time, also a daughter in the end. So it takes me from childhood, from when we grew up north, in my hometown, Alustar, to me going overseas, and um, and then coming home to Malaysia and trying to find an identity for myself because my father loomed so large, and I often felt that people were only interested in me because I was his daughter. And then working in HIV/AIDS, which was really, really a very significant time in my life because it just helped me grow so much. It really did in every way. And that led me on to, of course, Sisters in Islam and Musawa and now this. So I thought I'll read a little bit. Our childhood routine at Jalan Maxwell, Jalan Maxwell was where we lived in Alustar, was simple. School in the mornings, home for lunch and perhaps a nap. In the afternoons, after a shower, a change into fresh clothes and tea, we children were let out into the garden for a few hours of play. There we would find our greatest treasure, Pa Ashim, our gardener. While he mowed and trimmed and kept the garden in order, Pa Ashim would regale us with stories, mostly Malay folk tales involving Sang Kancil, the mouse deer who could outwit bigger predators in the Malayan jungle. We would trail him around the garden, listening open-mouthed to his tales of the mouse deer's wit and cunning, complete with sound effects and dramatics. When he came to the end of his repertoire, we would make him repeat old stories, each time marveling anew at Sankanchil's exploits. Our favorite tale was the one where Sankanchil outwitted a river full of crocodiles by pretending he was the royal animal census taker. By making the crocodiles line up in the river, he crossed to the other bank by knocking each reptile on the head as he counted them. One, two, three, pop! And once he reached the other side, Sankancha promptly disappeared, laughing at the angry crocodiles he had fooled. This finale never failed to send us into peals of laughter. I went to a Catholic girls' school, St. Nicholas Convent, Monday to Friday, and had Saturday and Sunday off. My brothers, however, went to Iskandar School, which followed the local work week with Friday and Saturday as the weekend. This meant that I had to go to school on Fridays while everyone else was at home, and then was at home on Sundays when everyone else was at school or work. As the only girl in the family, I quite enjoyed these mismatched days. It meant that instead of our driver, Dad would drive me to and from school in his dark blue fin-tail Pontiac on Fridays, which gave us both precious time with each other. On Sundays, I loved the idea that I could lay in bed as my brothers rushed to get ready for school. My parents sent me to St. Nicholas because it was a good school. At the time, few Muslim parents placed their daughters in the convent school because there was an unfounded fear that nuns teaching there would convert us to Christianity. In fact, missionary schools for girls and boys in Malaysia were known not just for accepting children from all faith backgrounds, but also for teaching in English and for high academic achievements by their students. I started at St. Nicholas at the tender age of 4, when it was rare for any local parent to send their children to school so young. I spent 3 years in kindergarten in all. With my two oldest friends, Solbi and Saraswati, we threaded pictures on cards, learned our ABCs, sang nursery rhymes, and as with little children everywhere, we picked up English as easily as breathing. Oddly, I have a memory of Dad asking me when I would speak the language, even though I cannot remember a time when I did not. So, and that goes on to talk about teachers and friends in school, and moving house to from there to um, another house because of my mother. I think that was the one thing that I also, even though I spoke a lot about my dad, I also wanted to speak about my mom because she was really very strong force in the family. And the house we lived in Jalan Maxwell in Alasta was a government house, which we had because of my mom and not my dad. My mom was in the government service. She was in government service all the way until she retired. Whereas my dad was in government service at first, and then he left to start a private practice. So the house was an entitlement that she had as a government servant. And we lived there, and then we lived in another house a bit further away when she had a different job before we finally moved into our own house much later. Um, the other bit I thought I would read comes from a much later era when I was working in HIV. And at that time, in the 90s, of course, HIV was a global problem. There was no cure at the time. And I was invited to join the Malaysian AIDS Foundation primarily because it was thought that I knew how to fundraise. And I wound up spending 12 years at the Malaysian AIDS Foundation and Malaysian AIDS Council. And I have to say, I'm forever grateful for that time because I grew so much. As a person, I learned that I had leadership skills I never knew I had. I learned how to speak my own language better because I had to communicate. I met so many people. I traveled the world. I really met a lot of people I think I would never have met otherwise. And I think one of the most important things during that time was that I think I grew up as a Muslim, always from young, and my parents, made sure I had all the basics and everything. But I think I really began to understand the the moral and ethical foundations of Islam when I was working in HIV/AIDS out of real necessity, really, because there was no way of separating people's beliefs from their response to HIV. And I think, you may remember some of those episodes from when we had an international conference on HIV/AIDS and how difficult that was. But it was you're mentioned in the book, by the way, in case you haven't noted that, because of that conference. Um, but it really made a difference for me because really during HIV/AIDS time, I really began to understand more about human rights, particularly where it's related to health. And I also began to see how it is totally compatible with Islam. There's no contradiction at all. So I thought I'll read just this very short bit about what I felt about AIDS and religion, particularly Islam, because there were also very much as in feminism, that there were AIDS activists who really didn't want to have anything to do with religion at all. They thought that it was a barrier to doing, the right thing in HIV/AIDS, and I always thought that wasn't true, because I knew just from talking to people how important religion was to them, and how they very often needed the spiritual, sustenance to get them through a very difficult situation when you have HIV. So I'll just read this bit. When people presume that AIDS takes people away from religion, they have very little experience of what the reality of AIDS is. To my mind, AIDS brings people closer to their faith, whatever it may be, because it makes you think about mortality so much more when you know it can be foreshortened at any time. What a cough is to an uninfected person can become tuberculosis to an HIV positive person. A rash to someone else can become Kaposi sarcoma, a form of skin cancer, to someone whose immune system has been suppressed. People are afraid of those with HIV, when in fact, people with HIV are always in danger from others, physically and mentally. But this consciousness of mortality and how you cannot take it for granted also brings with it grace. I have seen men and women who have the virus in their veins wake up each day to talk to others, especially young people, about what moments of foolishness can do to their lives. Judge Edwin Cameron from South Africa a brilliant jurist, spoke up many times in that articulate judge way about being HIV positive. My colleagues on the UNAIDS Program Coordinating Board, who represented other regions of the world, were kind and supportive and greeted me with warm hugs when we were all in Geneva or New York for those grueling rounds of meetings. Another judge, Michael Kirby of the Australian High Court, became a dear friend after we met at various conferences, and I served on several task forces on HIV with him. It was a world that was so diverse and representative of the entire globe, all speaking the same language, moved by a passion to do something about this pandemic, that it gave me faith in humanity. The ones who sat with their arms crossed, scowls on their foreheads, were a minority. Most people genuinely wanted to do something about HIV. In that time, I learned more about my religion than I would have in any other situation. It did not make me want to don a hijab, but it did make me see the way in which God tests us and how we pass or fail that test. I believe that HIV was sent to us as a test of our humanity, especially our capacity for compassion, which I think is what differentiates humans from other living beings. It is a test of empathy as well, the ability to put ourselves in the shoes of others, especially those who are very different from us. I had everything going for me when I joined the HIV world. I could have chosen any other cause. But I still feel to this day that HIV/AIDS chose me, that there was a specific reason why the challenge was placed in front of me to take up. It was a gift given to me to show what I was truly made of. I may not have fully succeeded, but I think it helped me become a more whole person, with more faith in whatever talents and skills that had been given me, as long as I put them to good use. That faith is what helped me withstand whatever detractors have thrown at me in the following years. Yeah. So that was that was what I got out of my 12 years in HIV. So that's pretty much what my memoir is. It is a memoir. So it's my view of things. There have been some people who've disputed what I wrote about politics in Malaysia, but they are just my observations, what I saw, what I heard, and they were pretty fresh because it wasn't that long ago. So I always tell people, well, you can always write your own version of things. This is my version, you know. So, apart from that, I think most people have been very kind and said they've enjoyed it. They've enjoyed the childhood parts much more, I think, than the rest for some reason. Um, but yeah, it's been an enjoyable ride. It has whetted my appetite for writing long form, I must say. There's nothing I would like more than to be able to go away somewhere and just sit down and write some more. But so many things are getting in the way with work and all sorts of other things. But I'm taking notes all the time because I journal all the time. So hopefully there'll be more material. I think there's so many stories that have to come out of this part of the world. I don't think we're that well represented in the world of publishing globally. There's so much that we can say. I think there are perspectives from Southeast Asia that may differ from the rest of the world, particularly from women. And I think the stories need to be told. And I'm very encouraged that there are beginning to be quite a few young Malaysian writers, Singaporean, Indonesian, who are now getting some recognition further afield than just our own backyard. So I'm very pleased with that. So shall I just stop there, Amina, and let's chat?
Thank you so much for the lovely reading selections that you made, especially the one about sort of an ethical integration of Islam through the challenging work on the AIDS Council. I probably have too much that I wanted to kind of talk about in specific, but first let me just say that when you gifted me the book, I was very happy to get into it. And just like reading your dissertation on the transgender community, your writing is very captivating. And the funny thing for me is that I don't think the childhood memories captivated me as much as you sort of walking us through so many exciting parts about the political process in Malaysia. Because although, I mean, I came there, about 35 years ago, a lot of things would happen and I only kind of skimmed the surface. I'm not really I'm not active in the body politic. So, I don't always know who's running and I don't always know, even in my own country, it really made it accessible in a way that helped me to say, oh yeah, I remember that, and I remember that, and I'm like, oh, well, that's really interesting because what you do is, and that's why I mean I would recommend this book for people who are teaching history of Malaysia because not only do you give the events as maybe covered in any newspaper or a journal, but you give these back events as well. And so what happens is I found myself captivated because they took on like way more life than if I was just reading a newspaper, which is probably why I can't follow politics very well. So in that respect, I think that your writing capabilities are so good. I mean, I noted that when you shared the dissertation with me, because of my interest, in the issues of sexuality and education. And with this one, there were so many things that I learned about you, even though I've known you 3 decades. That actually gave me so much greater admiration. I mean, I knew you for the work that you've done and work you've done, with sisters and with Musawa is work that I've also had an opportunity to work with you. Other than the conference, I didn't have a chance, to really follow the work that you were doing in terms of HIV/AIDS. But you share the stories with a kind of rigor and attention to their impact in Malaysia altogether, but also because, I mean, you sort of come home and have tea. And you have a way to fill in this background to this foreground that for me made it captivating so that I could kind of like go through all of these details that, oh yeah, yes, I say, I remember when that happened, but I didn't know that was happening, and so I think, you're to be commended on making those things accessible. I like the way you say, this thing about it's your story. I'm just going to read this little paragraph from the prologue. This is the story of the journey I have taken in my life as my father's daughter. Although much of it will feature him, it is not his story. While he was crafting his and that of millions of Malaysians, I was trying to write my own with ink-stained fingers and whatever paper was handed over to me. I would be the first to say that being the apple of Dad's giant tree is a life of privilege, at least when viewed from the outside. But branching out from under those leafy branches has its cost. This is my story, viewed from behind, alongside, and sometimes opposite that of Dad's. I am striving to tell it without blowing anybody's horn, but with sincerity and honesty, with my truths and nobody else's. Enjoy the ride. I did enjoy the ride. And some of the things you say about the dynamics of your relationship and even some of the things that you shared here about, when you're under, the shades, of that great tree, how do you come out and have your own life? And I just think you've done an amazing job because the issues that you've chosen, I have witnessed that you put your whole self into them. And then when I, read the memoir, I got an even richer feeling for it and my admiration grew. So, I was, very taken by, some of the struggles that you engage with and even some of the conversations that you had with him, things, that I could never know. And in a way, they kind of like frame these events and they give the events, as I say, like way more excitement and interest for someone who like me, who's not really into like reading about politics and everything, but even here, when you're speaking, you still, have this wonderful, very natural, very organic kind of modesty about being terrified about going back to school. And actually, the thing that I got most out of the book is how much courage you have, how you invest in these things and that you invest in them based on authentic interest in the thing. You don't do the thing because it's the thing that's going to be most popular or it's the thing that's going to give you accolades, along the lines of a kind of legacy that your father has, but rather you've chosen interest, with regard to your own, human rights direction that have embodied those things. I don't think anybody at this point, would want to invite you just because you're Dr. Mahathir's daughter. I have a little tongue-in-cheek question that I wanted to ask, though. Well, I have two of them. One of them I thought, should I tell this or should I not? But at a certain point, there was a place where you talk about a conversation with your dad about being mediocre.
Yes.
Um, That's an interesting thing to share. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, what do you feel it was like to write this story while your dad, may Allah bless him with a longer and longer life, while your dad and your mom are still here with us? You were blatantly honest. You were forthright. You were, again, creative and, lovely style and very engaging. But you also were like really very vulnerable and, very forthcoming. How did that work in terms of, when you like shared it with your dad after the book was out?
Well, I only shared it with him after the book was out. I wasn't going to let him have any say while I was writing it. But he says he doesn't remember that episode at all. But for me, the fact that I remember it, 50, 60 years later, was because it was, it really stuck in my mind all that time. It's weird how you remember some things in your life, based on maybe a word, or because it's how you felt at the time. And I really felt that, gosh, he says I'm not particularly good at anything. And that question, what am I good at? I think haunted me for the longest time. Um, and even all the way up to university, and this whole question of who am I, uh what do I have to contribute, and what am I good at. I knew the only thing I felt slightly confident about was that I could write, but write about what, how do I apply it, um that was something that just took a long time for me to really feel comfortable with. And I say in the book that I have very serious imposter syndrome even to this day. That if I have to speak on some panel with all these PhDs and all that, I always feel intimidated. And I have a tendency to down downgrade my own abilities in contrast to everyone else there. And I'm slowly beginning to realize that really I shouldn't put myself down so much. But it's taken me this long, I'm 65 now. And yeah, so I just felt that I guess I didn't really think about, oh, what are they going to think about this? I just wrote what I felt. And I think it's important for books, especially memoirs, to be authentic, to really present yourself and not, try and be trying to gloss over things. And so I put in what I thought were fairly pivotal moments in my life, because it shapes you, right? Those are the moments which make you decide which way you're going to go. And even though I was 14, and I think 14 is an impressionable age. Yeah. So yeah, I had to put it in. But yeah, and my dad, I think my dad, when he read the book, found out a lot of things about me that I don't think he knew. um, I don't know whether it's, made him change his mind about me. But well, he says he doesn't remember that. But it just shows, how influential he is on me. I guess most fathers are, but him particularly, it was, a big deal for me. So I had to put it in there.
Okay, so let me share this little bit. Let's see. Hold on, because I have a couple of things and I want to make sure. Um, when you were in school and you had a classmate, um, having a famous father did not sit well with some people. One dorm mate who had lost her father when she was young reduced me to tears by simply having not just a living one, but one who was constantly in the newspapers. She would snipe at me at every chance. Oh, it's for you. You still have a father. I don't recall other classmates suffering the same suffering the same. So it felt as if I was being specifically picked out. Were your achievements more valid if you did it without parents? I puzzled. At 16, already insecure in the competitive environment, it only deepened the imposter syndrome that I felt then and have never quite been able to take off. I also love the empathy that tried to have for her, even though your own struggle by having a famous dad and at the same time, the courage to be your own person was really the uppermost thing in your mind. In other words, you weren't having the things that came because your father was famous only. You had things because you strove for those things. And, she couldn't see those things because, she had her own, sensitivity and everything. But at the same time, I love that you shared that because, from the outside, people sometimes will, I'm sure, many times, I like the things with the policemen, for example, they will simply, give you a pass because, you're Dr. Mahathir's daughter. And
Yeah.
yet, by taking, certain issues, you talk about backlash, within certain, so-called religious, spokespersons, in the community and everything, by having to stand for the things that you, really believe in, I think you really showed your mustard. And as I said, I just think you're courageous. So,
Thank you. Mm.
and this, I want to share this part about the HIV/AIDS conference. You shared some of this, but I'm just going to share like another little snippet. But I had grown up believing in a just and compassionate religion. I thought of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a kind man who would have extended his hands to help anyone who was suffering. I did not and could not believe that the approach of the religious authorities that I knew truly reflected what I had been brought up to believe. I also saw other faiths, especially Christian and Buddhist, had a different approach, one that sought to provide solace and support rather than criticism and condemnation. Surely my religion was no less sympathetic to the marginalized. I believe strongly that religion, especially my own, Islam, had a positive role to play in the AIDS response, particularly in encouraging compassion and care and discouraging prejudice and discrimination. And I'm teaching a course this semester, which I called, sort of like towards a methodology of compassionate reading of Islam.
Mhm.
And I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly that, compassion, according to Karen Armstrong, which is sort of the first book that we read, and after that, everything is just Islamic sources. But compassion means a certain kind of action, the idea of extending, the hand. And, I started the class with some hadith quotations about compassion, compassionate acts on the part of the Prophet. And, even including, his compassion towards animals,
Yeah.
and the environment. And compassion is embodied. It's not just something you stand on the sideline and say, oh, what a pity,
Yeah.
again, I think your life has represented that because, you rolled up your sleeves, as they say, and got your hands dirty by engaging in issues, that involve people suffering, women in the case of the work that you did with Sis and Musawa, and people with HIV/AIDS in the case of the AIDS Council, that you represented the best of what we have in the religion. And, I'm even more in awe.
Thank you. Mm.
I don't mean to shut you up by saying this.
I'm just a bit shy to hear all this from you. I mean, really,
Yeah.
I'm
I feel like I know you better now, so maybe I can things that maybe I wouldn't have said before. I've only ever known you as you. I did know that you were related to your father. I've been at Eid gatherings in your house, and when he comes in, I think to myself, oh, maybe this is my photo op. And then when everybody lines up to get a photo, I just think, oh, he doesn't. I mean, come on, he's just here to visit his daughter. He doesn't want to always be there. So I've never done it. I've never had a picture with your parents. But it's always in the back of my mind. But then I think, I mean, Marina invited me here for an Eid celebration. She didn't invite me here to take a picture with her dad. So I've never done it because I have only known you, and what I know you, has always been admirable. It's just that now, I don't know, and now in a way, I just feel like you're even more well-rounded, because I see some of the struggles in some of the ways in which you had to basically become your own tree.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think that's one thing that I wanted people to understand because I just feel that I'm often judged just, just from the outside, and people think, oh, she's the PM's daughter. Oh, look, she's always in the paper, but they don't look at the substance of what I do. And I know people who actually work with me know that, I will lick envelopes and pack boxes if I need to. I have no worries about that. And that's the way I was brought up, really. I mean, I think, I would never take that away from the tree or the trees. Both my parents, they brought me up to be that way, and that's why I'm like this. I can't imagine being any other way. Just sort of swanning around.
I imagine they're both very proud of you. How come they didn't want you to be a medical doctor? I wanted to ask that too.
Oh, actually, my parents are a bit different from most Asian parents in that they let us do what we wanted. I mean, they just said you finish school, finish university, but you can choose what you want to do. They didn't expect us, any of us, to become doctors. Um, Although they did sort of say later on, oh, it'd be nice to, like our friends whose children are all doctors, and but they just let us. And so none of us really wanted to do medicine. We just sort of felt like, oh, it's not really our thing. My brothers, became engineers and things like that, did business. And yeah, there wasn't any medical bones in our blood despite our parents. But I think, it's not so unusual because both my parents, my dad used to write a newspaper column as a student, and he was an activist for independence. My mom always wanted to be a journalist, but decided on medicine because she wanted to. Her mom was ill, and she wanted to treat, someone who was ill like her. And well, it was fortunate for us because that's how they met. Yeah, and if they had pursued other careers, both of which involve writing, they might not have met. But because they both decided to do medicine, they did, and then we came along. So life is like that. Life is strange. I realize. So I just
So
have to pop up a bit because I have to pick up my thing. 1 second.
both of your earplugs are gone.
Yeah, one. Okay.
Yeah. Um, uh, I forgot to mention before we started when I was talking about reviewing friends, who have reviewing books of friends who have written recently. One of the people I interviewed writes actually they're murder romance stories located in the Sufi communities of 10th and 11th century Baghdad, which
Oh.
was her. She's a PhD in history, which was her academic thing, and they're marvelous. Laurie Silver. I don't know if you know any of her
Oh.
work. Just marvelous. I'm so smitten by the characters and her character development. Do you think you might take your hand at writing fiction?
Well, when I was writing this book, my memoir, I realized that writing nonfiction is hard, especially if you're writing, like this. It's called creative nonfiction. Um, and because you have to be accurate, you're writing about things that actually happen, so you have to get it right. There is, I have to say, one factual mistake in there, which I'm revising for the second edition, I hope. Um, but then, so I decided, like, fiction must surely be easier because then I can make things up. So now, you know, out of a lack of of anything to do, which is so untrue, I've decided to take a course in novel writing. I don't know what's going to come out of it. I have some ideas in my head, but I'm just going to do this course, and it'll take about a year at least, I think, to complete. I'm just doing it online. And if something comes out of it, great. If not, then I don't think I've lost anything by learning how to write. So we'll see. We'll see. There's always the issue of getting agents and publishers and things at the very end. But there are things gnawing in my brain that I'd like to put down on paper.
I think
We'll
it would
see.
be,
We'll
I think
see.
it would be fun because you have so much style. And the one thing that I, learned from reading from Laurie, I always tell her, I said, I read because she asked me to read and she was a friend. I didn't expect to like it. I didn't expect to get engaged with it. Like, I'm interested in what's going to happen to these characters and everything. And because the historical location of her novels is so accurate, I actually,
Right.
I can feel myself walking down, the narrow back streets of Baghdad and everything with her. And I see that with her, it gave her a way to transfer the knowledge that she had learned. She has a lot of research, she says, in order to, locate certain things and to sort of depict these characters in a, realistic way. But I think that your writing style is so strong, it's so fluid that if you, even the stories that you learned from the gardener, even if you decided to make a collection of stories that were similar to that, it's just a way that you have a kind of creative license to express yourself. But the stories, they have to be realistic, so they're not,
Yeah.
but they have to be realistic or else it just doesn't, I mean, well, that's not true. You could do like, what's his name, Rolla, and have Fantastic Beasts and everything. But I'm just saying that, if the stories don't hold up to something, then they don't hold up. But I think that
Yeah.
your writing style is so captivating that if you ventured off and you told stories even about the things from your childhood and, things from other parts of Malaysia that I look forward to it, so let me know. You can definitely test me out as a reader. And,
Okay.
I expect, however, to be smitten. So my expectations are high based on the things I read before, whereas my expectations were really low with Laurie, I admit. And then after that, I was just smitten and I just,
I must go and find her book. She sounds like a Hilary Mantel type.
oh man, it's
Oh my
amazing.
eye.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Our hour has passed, believe it or
Oh,
not. I say it goes by very quickly. I did have other passages, but that's just my way of sort of engaging some particulars when we talk. And, if we have a gallery, sometimes I don't get to say as much. When I was here with Layla, I had so much stuff I never got to, except for one of them, because, we had more people in the gallery. So it's been my pleasure to talk about your
thank
books.
you.
Thank you again for the gift. Those of you who are watching, be sure to get it. As I said, it is wonderful writing, so you don't have to worry that you have to bore through a bunch of facts and stuff about the politics and everything. They are there, but even for somebody like me who doesn't really like that kind of stuff, I got engaged. So I think that you will enjoy. I look forward to whatever you write next, be it fiction or nonfiction. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Amina. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.